Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start our programming. Greetings and welcome to our first event for the academic year 2020-2021. My name is Uzma Rizvi. I'm an associate professor of anthropology and urban studies at Pratt Institute. In my role as chair of the board of the anthropology section, New York Academy of Sciences, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us from all the various places you may be from. I'd also like to thank the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research and Bergen Books for supporting the anthropology section. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the many hours of work done by our Board of Advisors for the section, and in particular, our Anthropology Section Fellows, Anna Sergeyeva and Miriam Leitner. Without all of them, none of this would be possible. Please do follow us on Twitter and Instagram at NYAS_Anth, like us on Facebook, join our listserv, and become part of our vibrant community of anthropologists. You can see here on the screen, the ways in which you can participate is through Q&A. You can raise a hand. There are ways in which you can kind of participate in the webinar going forward. Our theme this year is reimagining resilience, engagement, estrangement, and the politics of choice. Experiencing the paradox of both physical distancing and social linking during the current and former pandemics, problems exacerbated by increasing inequalities and extractive politics, our lives have never felt so excruciatingly connected yet far apart. In spite of, or perhaps in response to these problems, civic actions are leading some to create solidarities against all forms of inequalities and oppressions, while others retreat to xenophobia, racism, and hate crimes. In this year of profound social change, we explore how anthropological research and knowledge can contribute to understanding this era of intensive civic engagement, and also estrangement, alienation, and despair. What are the contexts that contribute to our sense of empowerment and which drive us away from civic engagement? What historical analogies and biocultural examples might we use to further our understanding of how differences and recoveries have been negotiated regionally and over time? How can we come together locally, nationally, and globally to build a world that meets collective needs? And how do we know what those needs are? Our program this year will feature scholars engaging with themes of reimagining resilience, including topics of recovery, marginalization, political consciousness, representation, and estrangement. This series builds on our previous theme, sustainable humanity, so to now in some sense explore sustainable sociality, opening up inquiries into how engagement, estrangement, and the politics of choice can inspire or preclude sustainable futures and senses of belonging. The 2020-2021 programming will include lectures, interactive workshops, and exhibitions, allowing us to focus on how anthropological research and knowledge can contribute to helping resolve these salient and pressing socio-political issues. The significance of publicly oriented scholarship is a core tenet of the anthropology section. It's with this in mind that we're absolutely delighted to present a workshop entitled Making Your Research Make a Difference, Designing a Strategy to Engage the Public with Social Media. This has been facilitated by Cool Anthropology. Cool Anthropology was founded in 2010 by Christina Baines, a social anthropologist, and Victoria Costa, a digital strategist, and is dedicated, and here I want to quote from their website, it's dedicated to breaking down the walls between the academic ivory tower and communities around the world. We produce live and digital installations promoting embodied experience and deeper learning, and scale our impact with the digital companions and curriculum guides, end quote. In addition to being a vital member of our board, Christina Baines is an associate professor at CUNY, Gutman Community College, and affiliated faculty at CUNY Graduate School of Public Health. She is the director of anthropology for Cool Anthropology and a socio-cultural anthropologist with an applied medical environmental focus. Her research interests include indigenous ecologies, health, and heritage in the context of global change, in addition to publicly engaged research and dissemination practices. Victoria Costa is a creative innovator who leverages her skill in design thinking, program management, technology, and collective action to build community around projects supporting more just societies. Her interests include social permaculture, rethinking education, and breaking down the walls of academia to provide wide access to research ideas. She is co-founder and principal strategist at Cool Anthropology, research scholar at the Ronan Institute, and serves on the advisory board for the Oglala Lakota Economic and Cultural Revitalization Initiative. They will be joined by co-facilitators Baird Campbell and Hania Delgado. I will now pass this on to the four of them to begin this workshop. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Uzma and the New York Academy of Sciences. We're very happy to be here opening up this really important programming. Uzma did give us a little introduction to Cool Anthropology. Some of you are old friends, some of you are just getting to know who we are. So we did include a little introduction to ourselves before we get stuck into our workshop. So Cool Anthropology, as Uzma said, is a collective. We are anthropologists. We work with different anthropologists, but we also work with creative technologists, artists, filmmakers, and we're working together to engage the wider public in anthropological concepts. And so we all know this, right? Anthropologists have developed these tools and frameworks for understanding communities and cultures. We have a very a vital core tenet that we think is very valuable to the public at large. And so that's what drives our work. We produce this grounded research, and we feel that people and organizations should have better access to leverage anthropological research. So we've done this in lots of different ways. We're always developing, we're always doing new projects. We do live installations, as Uzma said in her introduction. We've had hackathons, we do virtual installations, and we do different sorts of events that get translated from the physical space into the virtual space. And we also do quite a bit of social media, which you'll be learning more about today to translate these concepts in different ways. So like Uzma said, we were founded in 2010 and we keep growing and scaling. A lot of our projects are now currently turning into digital companions and curriculum guides, and so that they have a longevity, so you can follow us and talk more about us as we move through.
I just wanted to add that we've, in the last year, we've been able to put together a really great core group. And you've seen a lot of the work of this group with Baird Campbell and Hania Delgado at the helm of it. So we're going to explore a lot of that later, but we're really excited to have a great team.
So we got started without a roadmap. So one of the reasons that we wanted to provide this workshop is that lots of people have approached us and they would like a roadmap. So today, hopefully we'll provide an interactive roadmap, a workshop to help you with that part of your research and getting it out to a wide audience. And we do have people from all over the world. Hopefully there's some on this call that are engaged in Cool Anthropology's work all over. And our publics are broad, right? So we do work with other anthropologists. There's some other anthropologists at this session, but also K through 12 educators, students, grandmas, armchair pundits, community organizers, a lot of audience. So we'd like to kind of get the interactivity started with a poll everywhere. So what we would like you to do is answer this question: which one word describes public scholarship to you? When you think about public scholarship, what do you think about? So you can see how you can respond at pollev.com. You can just text your one word to describe public scholarships, and do that now. We'll take a few minutes to talk as you guys are doing that, getting a cut. Oh, very good. Thank you. Accessible. Yes.
And this is going to come up a few more times throughout this presentation and workshop. So it's good to get acquainted with this now. If you have any questions about how to do this, or if you're missing out, just go ahead and add your words to the chat.
All right. Connected, relevant. Yes. Connecting. Critical. We like that. Yes. Engaging. Accessible. Underfunded, yes. Activism, we do see this as a form of activism. Community, no repeats yet. I like how we have a lot of different thoughts and minds. Community, I like that. Diverse. Multipath. Equalizing. Necessary. We'll give you a couple more minutes to see what we come up with. See if everybody's in. Local. Local is an interesting word, right? Defining local at this moment. I think our call, the New York Academy of Sciences call, definitely responds to that word. What does it mean to be local right now? Equalizing, equitable.
Reciprocity.
Ah, reciprocity.
You see transnational in the chat.
Okay, urgent in the chat as well, in the Q&A. Inclusive, situated, also. Accessible. Okay. All right,
Bigger.
it's getting bigger. Transnational. All right, so we see a trend in these words, right? We see community and local, but we see transnational, we see equity, right? Community, egalitarian, engaging, critical, respectful. These are all very important words right now. All right, last 30 seconds. I love watching these. I could watch this the whole workshop, but perhaps we want to move on and address some of these amazing words.
In the Q&A, we have scholarly integrity, which I think is important because I think sometimes we have the idea that public-facing research is sort of like a watered-down version of the work that we do, and I think one of the things we try to do here is not produce watered down concepts, but just think about how to do them differently, but still with that level of integrity.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, last look, comprehensible.
This is a beautiful word cloud.
It's a very beautiful
Very
word
well
cloud.
done.
Thank you very much for everybody for using the technology and embracing it and moving us forward. So some of those concepts that have just come up in this word cloud, we just wanted to talk a little bit about those. So we'll start out with this framing of why published scholarship is important. We see why it's important to you. Why is it important? How do you decide what your product is in terms of your public scholarship research, and what modality should you use in social media? What platform? And how do you connect with wider audiences, other practitioners, and influences? So how do we generate this network that is so important, which we're starting tonight, right? We're starting our public scholarship network. Take a look at the hashtags here, our event hashtags, Cool Anthropology, NYAS Anthropology.
If you post about this, go ahead and tag us and use these hashtags.
Okay. All right, so let's get into why public scholarship is important. We just heard why you thought it was important. In the context of the programming, remaining silent is also a political act. So we had words like critical, right? It's critical for us to engage with the public. And our silence is also making a statement. So we really believe that we have an obligation or a charge to engage with the public with our critical research. We also have this civic responsibility. We are responsible not just to the people that we work with, our research communities, but we're responsible to the community at large to use our expertise in service of the public good. So Anthropologists know things. We know things, right? We're very good at understanding and knowing things. We know things in a nuanced way, in ways that are very important, that are deep, that go deeper and beyond some of the other ways that other people know things, that are engaging with the public. So why not encourage and make ourselves available to be asked questions, right? If somebody has a question about a current event or what's happening in the world, why not ask an anthropologist? So we say this, you know, economists and sociologists are writing history in real time. When you have a question about policy, or a question about failures of policy, or something that's happening in the world, conflict, why call an economist and get them on your show? Why call necessarily a sociologist? Not to totally slam economists and sociologists, but why not ask an anthropologist? Our canon is rich, our research is deep, right? We have answers that we should provide, and we should make ourselves available to provide those answers. We want to deepen the public discourse. It's interesting that I chose this current, our deepen the public discourse. You know, we have flashy headlines, right, about topics that we have a lot to say about. And we want to engage people with our research, right, our research and our ethnographic work. And so to deepen the discourse and frame it in grounded discussion, and cut through the fake news, right, of the flashy headlines, so that the discourse is not just on the surface. We're not trading headline for headline, right, or clickbait for clickbait, that we actually deepen what the conversations are going about. So when we first started Co-Anthropology, we talked about that a lot, that we want to change the conversations. How are we going to engage? We're going to change the conversations people are having, and we're going to do it with our research. Okay, and there are pressing issues, right? Our theme for this year engages with the pressing issues of the moment. There are always pressing issues, but we have very pressing issues, and holistic perspectives can help us think about those issues in a different frame, right? If we think about these issues and questions in a different frame, then we can provide different answers. Right, and anthropology has that global reach where we're not just discussing what's happening here, right? But we can expand these concepts and deepen them and provide a global reach. So we have a clip just about the summarizing these issues and the issues that you brought up in the word cloud a few minutes from Wade Davis.
The extent to which anthropology, as just one of the social sciences, had effectively marginalized itself over the years, not universally, but generally. And a great example of that I recall is that I was living in Washington, D.C., and in the immediate wake of 9/11, 4,000 anthropologists gathered there for the American Anthropological Association annual meetings. 4,000 anthropologists in the capital of the United States in the wake of the biggest story of culture they or the country would ever face. And the entire gathering earned but a single line in the Washington Post newspaper in the style or the gossip section that essentially said, "The nutcases are in town again." And you honestly didn't know who was more remiss. The government for not listening to the one profession that could actually, with some considerable wisdom and insight, have answered the question on the lips of all Americans at that time, why do they hate us? Or even worse in a way, the discipline itself, which had very quickly cobbled together some ad hoc symposia that were fascinating, but they had no capacity or even inclination or reflex to speak or reach out with its considerable wisdom to the world at large. Now think about this. You know, Jerry Brown famously said about the war on terrorism, you know, how do you win a war on a technique? And how many talk shows have you seen since 9/11 that have been littered with self-professed terrorism experts? I don't know what university they go to become a terrorism expert, but have you ever seen an anthropologist? And yet every single conflict, not only of those dreadful wars, but virtually every conflict on the world today is essentially a clash of culture. And yet anthropology has been sort of remarkably mute.
All right, so he kind of summarizes what we've been saying in a bit of a cutting way, but we definitely recognize that encapsulation and has driven us to do our work.
Yeah, so what Christina and Dr. Davis have been explaining is this urgency to enter public discourse as anthropologists, and that the discipline itself and the richness of the methods and the self-reflexivity are vital for cultural understanding. Certainly we're at a moment right now that some may argue is as culturally transforming as 9/11 was. And it's imperative, it's critical in your own words, that you enter the discourse and you start speaking outside of the ivory tower. I myself am not part of the ivory tower. I'm a technologist, and I see the incredible benefits and research of anthropological methods and research and how they are transformative at different levels of understanding and change. So you yourself are your own product here. You're the product of years of training. You bring to every single interaction you have your perspective, the research you've done, the peer review process, so the real knowledge, the deep knowledge, and your experience working inside communities and with community partners. This knowledge goes with you everywhere you are. And I imagine many of you are already engaged online and in other spaces. So today we're going to discuss how to engage on social media specifically, but I want to say that you can bring your perspective and your experience into any conversation. The public can be a book club, it can be a community board meeting, it can be a webinar as a host or a participant. It's everywhere you are outside of the ivory tower. So who are you? You're a public scholar, you're here, you're interested to get your information outside of the ivory tower. I thought about different ways that you could immediately think about yourself in the public sphere. As an educator, as a community organizer, as a pundit, as an infotainer. I want to call out to this image right here on the screen. It says, "We are here, embrace for impact." It's one of Christina's students at their graduation. They're giving this out. And think about the impact we have on people inside the classroom, where you are in your educational spaces. The folks that aren't there, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, my Slack is blowing up. Folks that aren't there don't have access to this knowledge. And I think that that's something that everyone should be thinking about as I go through the next few slides. You're in the ivory tower, and the people that you're there with are absolutely going to make an impact in some way. What about everybody else? So there's a few different ways of thinking about this. You can think about yourself as an educator, and you can create teaching tools that are inside your own classrooms. Say you don't have a lot of time, there are actually ways that you can create assignments that might be non-disposable, that might be able to live in public spaces. And you can use your space to get that information without having to take the time, which I'm going to talk about later, which we don't have a whole lot of extra time considering all of our obligations. So thinking about how to get your assignments into the public sphere in various ways is a great way to do public scholarship. And carry forth the spirit of public scholarship as an educator. You can also think about yourself as a community organizer. I'm sure you're working with many different research partners wherever you are working in the world. You can help amplify their work using various media, or you can also provide anthropological insights and methods in your own communities. Like I said, you can show up at community board meetings. You can work with community organizations that are interested in doing the public work and having anthropologists or ethnographic methods be instilled into the work they're already doing. This one's probably the most popular and easiest in some capacities because pundits are people who just have opinions. So obviously these conversations are happening on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on YouTube, and all of these different places. You can just have an account and start giving your opinion based on your own research, based on what you know about the anthropological methods, and you can heighten popular discourse with your ethnographic insights and theory. And the last one I'm going to discuss today is the most fun, and it's something Baird Campbell, our public scholarship fellow, has some fun with, and that's infotaining, making rigorous academic concepts fun. You'll see a bunch of different memes and different cool graphics that we've come up with as a group, as examples later, and you can astound other academics and passersby with your creativity and wit. Have some fun with it too. So I think as we approach deciding what sort of public scholarship we want to engage in, we really need to assess how much time we actually have. And we need to choose modalities that suit your interests and your schedule and what you're capable of. Obviously, some are more consuming than others. And it takes a lot of time to get a lot of followers and feel like it's worthwhile in some capacity. So start small, set attainable goals, think about making collaborative relationships with other people. Writing a non-academic book is obviously more consuming than engaging in a Twitter conversation, but those can also require daily or hourly monitoring to be successful. So whereas something like an op-ed is just a one-off and you can write it and send it off and be done with it. So these are all things we're going to consider over the next little bit.
All right, so now that we've had a little introduction, I think that you're all here, so you think public scholarship is important, got your juices flowing. Victoria says, what kind of public scholar are you? Think about these questions, and we are going to have a little open discussion. These questions are about to go into the chat, so don't worry if you see us move to the poll everywhere. And then what our plan is that if you have an answer to one of these questions that you would like to share in a format other than the poll everywhere, which we will ask about the third question that you see on your screen. If you want to talk about the scholars that you have seen that have made the biggest public impact, or who's inspired you to become interested in public anthropology, and what kind of public scholar do you see yourself as? Your interests, your schedule, the educator, the community organizer, pundit, infotainer, or something else. So we're going to move to the poll everywhere, and we're going to ask that you think about that third question and answer the poll everywhere. And at the same time, if you would like to share your answer to one of the top two questions or talk a little bit more about the something else in the last question, we will monitor your raised hands, your little raised hand, and we'll invite you into the webinar to speak. So bear with us as that happens, but I'm sure it will be seamless. What kind of public scholar? Oh, educator, out of the something else, 50-50, interesting. Oh, okay, we got a pundit, excellent, some pundits. Oh, somebody thought they were an infotainer, but they weren't as fun as Baird. Oh no, they're coming back.
I love to see the race. Do we have any raised hands or any volunteers? Can we inspire some folks to to talk about the sorts of public scholarship they're interested in, or different sorts of public scholars that inspire them?
Any raised hands we have going on here? Let's look.
We did, but then they disappeared.
Oh, we
I
did.
see two, Michael Zimmerman and Alexandra Kelly. Let's go with.
Can we
Aha.
add Michael Zimmerman? Talking is permitted, and Alexandra. So maybe Michael and then Alexandra.
Hello, thank you for unmuting me. That's very kind of you. So in terms of my background, I myself am an educator, an assistant professor at a university. One aspect of public engagement that I've recently become engaged with, and this is sort of also a semi-plug for some friends of mine. My background is actually in the area of archaeology rather than straight anthropology. I'm in charge of the public archaeology concentration at our university. And one aspect of public engagement, which I've really recently become involved with, is archaeo gaming, the intersection of video gaming and personal gaming and anthropology and archaeology. And we actually recently had a very interesting public-facing conference this July called Archaeo Gaming Con that was run by Bill Octor and Sarah Head, who are at Archaeo Thoughts and at Archae Fantasies on Twitter, which was a sort of interesting combination in that it employed both sort of standard paper sessions as you would normally see at a conference, but also included the playing of games live on Twitch with responses about various cultural elements associated with it over the course of the gaming. So that was just a fun thing that just sort of popped into my head that I wanted to mention.
That's so cool. And Twitch is not some place where you really think about any kind of scholar being. So I really think that's an amazing project.
Yeah. And thank you for representing archaeology. You know, Baird and I are cultural anthropologists, and so we tend to have a bias in our work here, but the NYAS section has a wide variety of anthropologists from all of the subfields. So thanks for that. I think Alexandra should be able to talk as well.
Hello.
Hi.
I was gonna say, in terms of scholars that have kind of inspired me with public engagement, I was gonna mention Adrienne Keene, who runs Native Appropriations. And I think it started as a blog, and then, you know, maybe now she's more active on Twitter, but she would post about, you know, people wearing Native American headdresses to concerts, or I don't know, like Urban Outfitters selling underwear with Native American patterns on it. And she would take these little, you know, examples and then talk about why that was problematic. And I think she's gotten a lot of engagement that way.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that engaging with like a public an issue in a very head-on kind of way and giving the anthropological perspective is really important. Can we permit Carrie?
Yes.
Carrie is a longtime collaborator and awesome friend and cool anthropologist. So just to give her a little introduction.
Well, thank you. My name is Carrie Hawk-Lassard, and I am actually the executive director of an urban American Indian health organization. I am an applied medical anthropologist, and I don't like to write, or what I should say is that I have chosen to write from an Indigenous perspective and use Indigenous knowledge production methods like storytelling, and the Academy still doesn't like that. So I've been fortunate to collaborate with a Native artist who's able to convey anthropological concepts into art, and most of these revolve around activism. So we've actually worked, Greg mostly has worked with Adrienne Keene, but I feel like we have had an impact around those issues of cultural appropriation and the way that they reinforce historical trauma in our communities and make us unwell. But I think especially the work that Greg Deal has done around mascots really did lead to the change, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement pushing it over the top. So I've seen anthropological tools be able to be wielded really powerfully within art spheres, and I've been glad to have the opportunity to do that. And Team Meryl Singer, thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And I actually, at the end of the presentation, where we focus on that piece about identifying your influencers and collaborators, we do have an image of Greg's work. So we can, well, call back to your amazing work, Carrie. So thank you so much for sharing, and for, it's sort of like, you know, it's a very positive message, right? Like that there can be an influence, and you felt it, you know, very palpably recently. So thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else have their hand raised? Anybody want to share? Anybody who's an infotainer want to share, or a pundit? We do have a question in the chat. This might be while somebody is deciding if they want to share their answers to those questions.
Building up the nerve.
Building up the nerve, yes. Destiny asks in the chat, in the Q&A, why do we think anthropology has trouble entering the public discourse, especially compared to the other fields? Oh, were you going live with that question, Baird? Or is that just a message that I got? We can answer it together. I feel like it has something to do with this historical, the history of anthropology, right? And how somehow public anthropology has been kind of severed somehow from, you know, doing real theoretical anthropology. Like Baird was saying, there's some kind of perception that if you engage with the public, that you're somehow watering down your concepts or the rigor of your methodologies and your research. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think that it does exist. I think that we just need to. I also think there's a part of anthropology not really showing up in K through 12 education. So people not really having a complete understanding of what anthropology is. That's why these K through 12 initiatives, I think, are so important as well. From my perspective, is that, you know, you kind of have heard in social studies about sociology, people kind of think about economists. I don't know if you hear about economics in K through 12 education, but I don't know. I think there's some confusion about what anthropology
And I do
is.
think it goes back to an old conversation that we've had right at the beginning, that what good is information if it's just a report back, you know? And a lot of anthropology is something that you read, and it's not something that you take action with. And that's a debate that we've had for the last 15 years of the imperative of these grounded methods and these grounded understanding to have some kind of application. So I think that it's tradition within anthropology to stay out of these conversations. And I think a lot of people within the discipline, and certainly us today, are saying it's imperative that this sort of grounded, that the public discourse is more grounded. Baird, what do you think about that?
Well, all of these things. And I want to emphasize also the importance of K through 12 education, because most people's first and only exposure to anthropology is at the university level, which is obviously not a level that the majority of people get to in the first place, right? But I also think it's really important to talk about, without sort of entering into this whole conversation, the increasing kind of commodification of higher education, right? And there is not sort of a very straight A to B career path that goes with pursuing anthropology as a major, or in my case, as an advanced degree, right, unless you want to join the academy. And I think because which is obviously not entirely up to you whether you join the academy, as we know. But I think the more that we kind of understand university education as an exchange of money for a skill set, the harder it is to sell what is essentially a way of viewing the world, right? Like that is what we have to offer. And it's not that that isn't applicable, but I think it's harder to fit it into the paradigm that we're putting economics into, or law, or right, these things that have these sort of direct and obvious applications.
Thank you, Baird. Destiny, I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, please put it in the Q&A. Others who have questions, please add them to the Q&A as well. If nobody else wants to speak on these three questions, they're inspiring scholars and how they came to the kind of public that suits them. All right, so I think our next section, Baird and Hania are going to be covering, and I just want to give them a little introduction as we move into this to them. So Baird, we're very fortunate to have. He's a PhD candidate in social and cultural anthropology at Rice, and his dissertation, The Archive of the Self, Trans, Self-Making, and Social Media in Chile, brings together queer trans studies and studies of the archive and science and technology studies to explore how trans activists in Chile use social media to understand and shape their gender identities. And he's also the managing editor of Platypus, which is the Castak blog, where he's made accessible and public-facing scholarship one of his main priorities. So we're very fortunate to have his expertise and mad meme-making skills with us. So he and Hania will get into the nuts and bolts of how you do this with social media. So take it away, Baird.
Okay, thank you. So I am obviously a person who thinks about social media a lot, both in my sort of scholarly life and in my just love of social media. And I think a lot more people, because obviously we currently can't really go anywhere, I think a lot more people are finding themselves wondering how they can leverage these tools to think differently about their research, but are not necessarily sure where to get started. So what I wanted to run through today is a few examples of some stuff that we have produced here at Cool Anthropology, and things that are actually still in the pipeline, along with some kind of guidelines if you wanted to create similar stuff. So in general, there are kind of three things that we need to think about when we're trying to translate a concept onto social media. And I want to be really, I want to emphasize that that translate word, right? Because if you're doing a translation from one language or the other, you're trying to make it as exact as possible, right? Even if you don't say it the same way, you're trying to get the meaning to be as close as possible, which I think is something that's really important to remember in terms of, like, you don't have to simplify or water down your content. You just have to think about how you can say it in a different way. And there are kind of three things you want to think about, which are, what type of information are you actually trying to get out there, right? Is it a particular term that you feel people should be familiar with? Is it a larger theoretical concept? Is it a narrative story, right? Are you just trying to, like, put some of your ethnographic texture out there? The desired audience, right? So who do you want to see it? Do you want interlocutors to see it? Do you want your colleagues to see it? And the long-term impact, right? One of the sort of pros and cons of social media is that it is obviously pretty ephemeral. And so it's not always the best place for things that you want to have a super long life, though there are ways to get around that we're going to talk about. And here's just a little meme, a little infotainment that I made using a meme generator. I'm by no means like a meme expert, so you too can do this. And this is one that is targeted sort of at a more like niche anthropologist for anthropologists subject or audience, sorry. Can I get the next slide? There we go. So here, I'm going to obviously speak just about a few of these, but there are many, many public modalities, including many that are not on this slide, I'm sure. Can we? Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is memes. I really like memes. I went on a big tear about a month ago with some pandemic energy and made us like a bunch of memes. And I want to point you to a resource which is down at the bottom of the page here, which is imgflip.com. There's lots of different meme generators, but what I like about this one is that it has sort of like the top 50 memes. So if you're not a person who feels like they're on top of like what's the most current meme, you can look at what other people are using, right? And maybe start there. Some pros of memes, obviously they're quick and easy to digest. Depending on the meme, they might sort of have multiple audiences, right? Some of them are going to be more specific, obviously. And you're not inventing a new format, right? People know what a meme is and they know how to interact with it. Some of the cons are that if you're trying to get into like a particularly nuanced concept, a meme is maybe not the way to go. They're pretty ephemeral, right? So they kind of live and die pretty quickly. And then this one is really important, especially in 2020, but in general, you want to be really careful about when you put out a meme and what kind of meme you put out, right? So it is generally not advised to put out some sort of like light anthropological content right after a particular global tragedy or something, right? So this is, memes sort of have to be done a little bit more on the fly. So we have a thing at Cool Anthropology, which is cool, called A Swipe to Know. And these, we put them on all of our platforms, but they work particularly well on Instagram because of the way that Instagram is structured. And basically it's a set of 6 or 7 images with a given topic that have both images and text, and then, as you can see, a caption on the side that allows you to have a little bit more context. The pros of this are that you can do a little bit more with the interplay between images and text. You can use less text and more images, right? Takes advantage of platform affordances. This is really, I think, crucial. Think about what the platform is already made to do, and think about how you can work with the stuff you can do on the platform instead of trying to make it do stuff it doesn't want to do. And it's really good for giving an overview. We tend to do these for kind of larger questions, right? So what can ethnography offer the current moment? We have then kind of like 5 slides that are kind of bullet points almost of 5 different ways that anthropology or ethnography is useful right now. Some cons of this format are it does work best on Instagram. It works on other platforms, but it's designed for Instagram. It requires brevity, right? You have a limited amount of space in which to work, so you have to think carefully about what needs to be there. This is something that I find very difficult. There are certain abstract concepts, which is oftentimes what anthropologists are working with, that are really difficult to represent visually, right? And especially once you get into like which images are public domain, right? Who does this image belong to? It can sometimes be tricky to find images that convey exactly what you want, but all the more reason to make your own. And then just the politics of images, you know, it's fraught. One of the things that we run into is that virtually all pictures of fieldwork reproduce some really uncomfortable colonial and racial dynamics of like a very clearly marked white ethnographer, like in a village, right? And we, not all forms of ethnographic research are great, but you want to sort of think about what that image might be communicating that you don't mean for it to communicate. A video is a great way to go if you want to do something that's a little bit more expansive. This is a screenshot from the actual video in progress that we're just finishing up right now, so keep your eyes out for that. I like videos because they allow for you to really kind of sink your teeth into a topic, right? You have more time and more space to be a little bit more nuanced. They appeal to a wider range of audience, right? It's a very low bar for entry to watch a video. You just have to click on it and sit back. Again, this fits an existing media paradigm, right? So people sort of know about the like YouTube explainer video as a genre, right? And so you're not sort of having to reinvent the wheel. And they sort of can remain relevant longer because they tend to be about these sort of larger, expansive topics. The cons are that obviously video editing is laborious and is not something that everybody has the time or the equipment to do. I'd like to shout out my own advisor, Simini Howe, who is in this chat right now, who encouraged me to learn how to edit videos in her methods class, which has become very useful. They need to be, because of the social media part of the video, they need to be really tightly focused. There's all sorts of research that after 3 minutes, people stop watching your video. So this sounds easy, but is in fact pretty difficult in the same way that editing your article is difficult because you made it and obviously you like everything that you put in it, right? So it can be a little hard to strike that balance. And then, you know, the sort of con of the more in-depth character of this is that it also requires people to engage with it for longer. So people might not actually watch the whole video, right? And I wanted to talk about one that's just really text heavy. So a lot of these have up to now been kind of multimedia, right? Images and text. Essays are, I think, probably what many of us on this call are most comfortable with, right? This is sort of the closest thing to what we do in our sort of like academic existences. And there are great things about essays, right? They allow you, like a video, to be much more precise about what you're saying, you know, maybe add a footnote here and there. They correspond to an existing academic paradigm, right? So this is, again, thinking about your audience. These are maybe going to be more engaged with by people who are seeking out scholarly anthropological sources. But by that same token, they might have a longer life in academia as a result. The cons are obviously, they are probably the least engaging format for non-academics. There's sort of a high bar for entry when you see a big hunk of text. And this is a great reason to keep them pretty short. Ours tend to be around 600, 750 words, right? And because of this, there's always this back and forth between how specific can I be versus how short should this be, right? So there's a little bit of a weighing the pros and cons there. And then also it is the hardest to kind of spread through social media, right? We don't have, it's not built into those platforms in the same way that image-based stuff is. And then one thing I forgot to mention in the pros, but that I will, you'll notice that in this screenshot of this essay, there's a couple hyperlinks here. And one of the great things about an essay living online is that we can hyperlink to our other content, right? So these, the ethnography, I believe, links to the video that goes with this. Participant observation links to a previous swipe to know that we had made. So this is another thing to think about, is how can you make your content work with your other content. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is something that got brought up in the chat, which is that anthropologists do not always speak in ways that are particularly accessible to non-anthropologists. And as someone who started a PhD program with no experience in anthropology, I can attest to that. So similarly to what we talked about at the beginning, you just really want to think critically about who your target audience is. If I said this to my mother, to my neighbor, would they understand this? And if not, why not? Specialized language, if there's really a word that you feel like is precise and you want it there, right? Maybe that's the content that you push out, right? Educating people about what this word is and why they should know it, right? So it's not necessarily always about sort of sacrificing those big words, but they need to be framed in a way that invites people into that conversation rather than makes them feel excluded. And then the last thing, and this leads to Hania's section, is, and I think Victoria mentioned this too, it takes a while, right, to build an audience on these platforms. And so this is a social space like any other, and you all are ethnographers, right? So before you start trying to create content, you might want to do a little participant observation for a couple weeks, where you just look at how are people using Twitter, right? How do people use Instagram, and what should my content look like? What are the sort of paradigms for interaction, right? How do people talk to each other? So I'm going to hand it over to Hania now to talk to you about those platforms.
Actually,
We're actually going to interject for just a minute.
Oh, well then I'm not going to do that.
I did. Thank you, Bear. That was a nice handing over. I do want to introduce Hania, but before that, we'll just have a quick comment from Victoria.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of all of these ideas. What we try to do is think about our different little projects as transmedia projects and how they might live in multiple spaces. So for example, Baird wrote an amazing essay on why ethnography matters, which then informed the voiceover for the video. So we use a lot of the different materials in different contexts to get them in different spaces. So I just wanted to add that. So that I know that time is a really, really huge issue, particularly when this is not necessarily in service of your career. It's much more about community service.
We'll talk a little bit more about the particulars of that after Hania gives you more of the nuts and bolts of how you're going to do this and the considerations you should be making as your idea is now percolating. I want to just introduce Hania Delgado. She graduated from CUNY Baruch and earned a BBA in marketing management with a concentration in digital marketing. She has an obsession with plants and can usually be found wandering around a plant shop or nursery. And she loves creativity and losing herself in the process, especially when she's painting. She came to Cool Anthropology wanting to use her skills and stay informed, and the work has brightened her world. And her favorite cool anthropologist is Linda Black Elk. But she is constantly surprised by the amazing work of our team and the many incredible anthropologists whose voices we uplift. And we're very, very fortunate to have you, Hania, to help us be cooler than we are. So thank you.
Yeah, you are absolutely the impetus for the amazing Instagram and Twitter and Facebook accounts that we currently possess. So thank you so much for your hard work.
All right, so tell these folks how to do it.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate it. So after you've heard about the different types of media that you can create, and you've reflected on the type of person that you are, whether you're an educator or an infotainer, now you really start to think of where can I place this content that I have created, and choosing the platform might be a bit difficult, but once you really reflect on what you're creating, it'll make it a bit easier. So we're going to look at a few of the pros and cons of a few social media platforms. Starting off with Instagram, it's a great visual platform. What I really like about it is that it's very organized, so you can see all of the work together. It's quick on-the-go content, so it doesn't translate very well on the web version. So for images that you're just scrolling and clicking, it's quick content. Just take advantage of the hashtags. They're very useful to take your content and broaden the audience with those hashtags. As for Facebook, it's great because it has You can use any media on it, from videos to images to longer texts. And the great thing about Facebook is the Facebook groups. These are groups that are already set up and established on specific topics. So if you're an anthropologist and you're looking for an anthropologist Facebook group, and you have a small audience, you're still trying to grow your presence on social media, you can take your content to these Facebook groups instead of just waiting for something to happen on its own. As for Twitter, I like that it's also quick. You have 280 characters, but even though we have it listed as a con, I really like it because it gives you the opportunity to grab someone's attention within 280 characters. And if you don't have, if 280 characters isn't enough to grab someone's attention, you can always redirect them to a different platform so they can continue exploring your content. Hashtags also work great on Twitter, but you don't have to use as many as you would on Instagram. And the great thing is that they have trending topics that you can add to the conversation. Some of the downsides of Instagram, again, as I talked about, were it isn't great on the web version, and it isn't for every single age group. Facebook, we know, is there's security issues on Facebook. Fake news is prevalent, and organic growth is slow. And Twitter, you can't edit your tweets, and it can be tempting to trash talk when it's like quick and in the moment. Yeah. And we actually use all of those 3 platforms to expand our audience and our reach. For LinkedIn, it's a networking platform, so it's great to connect with other anthropologists. You can find relevant news and updates from your industry. And the great thing about LinkedIn is that you can actually publish your own articles instead of having to wait for something or some of your work to get published. The cons of it is when you get started, it does take time to get your account set up. And there are some hidden expenses for certain features, and it's a little less personal. Moving on to blogs. What I like about blogs is that it's easy to get started. There's a lot of different platforms that you can use, from Blogger to WordPress and Tumblr and Medium. Some of these platforms have things set up so you can get started quicker, and you can establish yourself as an expert. I've seen anthropologists use blogs to display images of their fieldwork and just use captions to explain what's going on in the pictures and explain their work. So it's mostly like a collage, and they have their personal information for you to contact them. So it's like a great way to showcase your work and have it as a portfolio. It is time consuming, and it does require strong communication skills to get your point across. The other one that is a bit blocked is Op-Eds. Op-Eds actually are great because you can establish yourself as an expert, and it increases your reach beyond like the academy. Some of the downsides are that it is difficult, or it is time consuming to get published. So after you've chosen 1 or 2 platforms, you don't want to overwhelm yourself if you're just starting off. So you can pick 1 to 2 platforms that are best for your work. Make sure that your account is public so that people can actually see your work. Make sure that you have a relevant profile and a cover photo and a brief and engaging bio to let the world know what you're all about, so it catches their attention as soon as they read it. And that's our Cool Anthropology Twitter bio. You can switch to a business account. Oh, should I read it? We get information out of the ivory tower, and I didn't get the other part, and onto the, I can't see the rest of it, I'm sorry.
We get it out of the ivory tower and onto the streets.
Yes. We can move on to the next. So when you switch your social media accounts to business accounts, there are some benefits to it, like accessing the analytics and getting more features. So this helps you understand your audience. It helps you see what your demographic is, where people are engaging with your content. So which posts are more successful, so you know that that's the type of content that people want to see. So you produce more of that type of content. And knowing what time your followers are active is great. So you know what days and times you can post to get the most interaction and reach. And after you've done all of this, you can create relevant content and post something, and post things that fit your brand and your niche. So this is from our Twitter highlights. That was one of our most successful tweets for the month of August. Yes, it was Kim Tallbear's quote. So ways to engage with your audience. Although this is the part that is a bit more time consuming because you actually have to interact with people. One of the easiest things, if you're following a lot of other anthropologists, the easiest thing you could do is leave a like on their posts. If you want to comment on them, I know that might be a bit more complicated if you're not like fully reading everything, but like a quick supportive comment saying great post, amazing, or a few emojis is always great. It can also be insightful, and doing these things really encourages other people to, in return, connect with and respond to your content. You can also repost content, which is great. Yeah, so on like Facebook and Twitter, you can retweet. It's a little bit more difficult on Instagram, but it can still be done. Using hashtags really increases your reach. So it's very helpful on Instagram and Twitter. Some of the things that you can do to engage with your audience are asking your audiences questions, running Q&As, doing giveaways, and commenting on current trending topics. That's very helpful on Twitter, and collaborating with other influencers. And some influencers we've collaborated with was the Anthro Perspective, where Christina was a guest on their podcast. So you can do things like that. One last thing, make sure that you're consistent. If you just stop posting out of nowhere, people are gonna think like, is this account inactive? So just really ask yourself, how often can you realistically post? How much time can you commit? And that'll really help you decide which platforms to use. Posting regularly and consistently increases your visibility on social media platforms due to algorithms. Again, finding the perfect time to post and scheduling your posts ahead of time really helps you without to not stress out over posting regularly.
Thank you, Hania. And all the content that you're seeing on all the slides is all our original content. So that's all that's sharing the imagery on the slides. And we will have access to these slides. It's in the chat, just so you know. Oh, it's right there. So we have a next set of questions, which we'd like you to consider. And we're actually going to ask you to take 5 minutes in this moment and actually do a little workshopping on your own. And then we'll move to the poll everywhere and invite some share outs again. So what is your idea? What has all this made you think about? Baird and Hania outlined some different kinds of modalities, some different platforms. Who's your target audience? What modality works best, and where will it live? So we want you to think very specifically about what it is. Choose a piece of your research that you've been trying to get out there, an idea, something that you think will engage with the current moment, and think about who you are and your time constraints and what kind of public scholar you are, and answer these questions. And then we will ask you, just gonna give you 5 minutes, ask you to do that. There's some amazing questions coming in on the Q&A, some great chat going on. We will get to those. We do have some time worked in to get to all of those, but we wanna give you some time where we're quiet and you're really percolating on these ideas and have something to walk away with. And we'd like to hear about them, right? So I'll give you a few minutes and then we'll move on to our poll everywhere and ask for some share outs. All right, everybody. Hopefully you used your time productively. Not to replicate the neoliberal language that Mina has been asking about in the Q&A. Productivity. What would someone like to share their idea? It doesn't have to be completely fleshed out, but answer these questions. If you want to raise your hand, we can allow you to speak in the Zoom language, the Zoom webinar language, and you can share some of your ideas with us. I'm sure people will find that very illuminating and helpful. Much of the work that you see is around the Ethnography Matters project. So you can also, if you don't want to raise your hand, go ahead and type your response in the poll everywhere that you see. What idea did you have developed? It's not fully developed. We don't expect that in 5 minutes, but maybe give us a phrase or a sentence. And
we got James here with his hand raised.
Jim, another friend of Cool Anthropology, long term.
Here, greetings. I'm James Maluli. I'm a professor at Fresno State. I'm also a director of an Institute of Public Anthropology. It's something we started a long time ago, and recently, I mean, I was chair for a long time, so we haven't done much with it, but I'm not chair anymore, and I'm really embracing this with my students of ethnography, which I'm teaching a course, which brings me to my idea. My idea is to continue a participant observation project I conducted 2 years ago about belonging, on a college campus, but within the constraints of stay at home. I in no way will allow my students to go out, because it's still, I mean, in Fresno, you can't even breathe because of the fires. But, and this is live, as it were. I teach an ethnography class of undergrads. Hopefully some of them are listening to me right now, actually. But my target audience for the final product is, and this is where a lot of my things are shifting on this, I want to make this as public as possible. So I've had several blogs where they can add stuff in that. And the modality, before we were using an app where they could take a picture and write the equivalent of a text message, and flag it as this index is belonging, this index is the opposite of belonging, which I forget what we operationalized it as. And I got, thousands of those data points. And I'm sorry I can't plug the app. I can't think of what it was. But what we're going to do now, and I'm working with my students about this, is interview, probably. Do Zoom interviews, one-on-one, student to student, or two students interviewing. But what's shifting me now in terms of listening to today is not just getting data, because I have baseline data on how you felt belonging, when you were corporally bumping up into everybody, and now you don't. That was my initial interest. Can you do a rite of passage through 2 dimensions of TV and all that? But now I want to expand it, because as a means of reaching out. When we're talking about belonging, this might a little scary for some of us. So, and as a means of helping ameliorate, the strangeness of all of this for all of us. So, where it's going to live is on the Institute of Public Anthropology website at Fresno State. Plug. But that's where I'm going with this. And thank you for allowing me to share, guys. Keep it cool.
Thank you so much, Jim. We'll definitely keep it cool. And the last little piece that we'll get to in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about building relationships. So definitely we want to hear about your Public Anthropology Institute. We want to hear about your project. We want to, we want to be part of it. We want you to be part of our projects. So thank you for plugging that. That's a good thing in this, what we're doing here, in this project that we're doing on public anthropology. We need to support each other. How to dismantle white supremacy within the academy, Instagram post on what local food contributed to a meal of the week. That's great. A lot of times using Instagram in classes, you can use a unique hashtag. I've done that lots of times in my classes where they have to relate a theoretical concept to something that they see, students, and they have to put a unique hashtag on it, in addition to being highly encouraged to use other kinds of hashtags. But invading that sort of space that is maybe usually not used in the classroom can be very powerful in terms of that civic engagement that we're talking about as well.
And some of the other ideas that I scrolled by have been so awesome, particularly related to visual anthropology and digital ethnography that just popped up. I think it'd be wonderful if one or two people could speak to how they might use visual anthropology, or how you might dismantle white supremacy in these spaces. Maybe we'll give you all a moment to muster up some courage, and we would love to get some discussion going on that.
So you have to use the raise hand function. Unfortunately, that's the way it works in a webinar. So Destiny, I see you want to talk. That's wonderful. I was going to address your questions in the chat too, but that would be awesome. Thank you, Destiny. Go ahead.
You can go ahead and unmute, Destiny.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm an undergrad at Fresno State. My professor was just speaking, Maluli. I am very interested in visual anthropology, but some of the limitations I've seen already is that when you're making an ethnographic film, they tell you not to edit too much, not to add music, not to make too many cuts and all these things. And so when you're trying to transfer that to, say, Instagram or another social media, that's incredibly difficult to keep to those rules and be able to provide it also to the masses. So it's kind of difficult when I want to do that, but then I'm going to have so much pushback from other anthropologists who are making these films. So even though I would have that pushback, I'm hoping to develop a way that is going to please both the established visual anthropologist and also still be like available and accessible to the public or non-anthropology people. So that's kind of something I'm actually working on at this moment, to be able to translate it into social media without upsetting the powers that be.
Yeah, I think so much of public scholarship means doing your scholarship again in a different format. And I think it will for the time being. I wonder if Baird can speak a little to how to translate some of the more rigorous anthropological work and assignments into something that's for pop culture.
Oh, sure. I think, you know, number one, none of us will ever create anything that everyone loves, right? So I think it is important for us to know why we made the choices we made, right? So rather than necessarily always adhering to what we feel like are very strict rules and conventions, if we diverge from them, having a reason, right? Not just sort of doing that to do it, but to say what I wanted to communicate required this, and I feel that it's the most authentic to my ethnographic context. But I also think that there are lots of ways to talk about the same thing, which is one of the things that obviously this workshop is about. But you might think about whether the format that you are sort of chafing against is actually the format that you want to use in that particular instance, right? So maybe you can't make a sort of 1 minute Instagram equivalent short film of a larger ethnographic film project, right? But could you turn some of the conclusions from that into an infographic or a swipe to know or a photo essay, right? Can you take stills, right? Could you do a video essay, right? Could you build an essay out of clips, right? So I think, just to like put a bow on this, paying attention to what is hard about what you're doing and why it's hard is sometimes the key to figuring out what you should be doing. right? Sometimes if you're having a really hard time getting it into a particular context, it might just be that you want to look for a different way to broadcast that same message.
That's a great response, Baird. Destiny, I wanted to offer you a charge to the rest of the more senior anthropologists on the call, that this is something that we need to do, right? We need to pave the way for students like Destiny to feel comfortable engaging in this conversation. Like this product that you are having me make is not something that anybody's going to watch. That my research is more valuable, that I want it to engage with these issues in a broader way. So we have to support this kind of public scholarship. And I think that we can do it without giving up rigor, without giving up, with still encouraging anthropologists that are coming up to have not to lose any of the very strong methodologies that we, instill in our students. But we have to do this the senior scholars have to get involved, because Destiny asks an amazing question, this interface, like how do you get buy-in? And we just have to provide it. So if you're on this call, you care enough to be on this call, talk to people in your department, share this civic responsibility with them, and allow for this space for us to create this work that is meaningful to multiple audiences as well. I don't know. Thank you, Destiny. I hope that answered your question. We have a few more. I'm going to sort of do a little bit of a wrap up, and maybe this will increase the call that I think that you need to support the great work that you're doing. And thank you so much for asking those questions, and pushing the boundaries. And that's very, very important. So how do we engage with the wider audiences and practitioners? So you've got your modality, you've got your ideas. So something that we've said throughout this evening, throughout this workshop, is it needs to be accessible but not watered down, right? So you see here a quote from Bianca Williams. She's coming up in the NYAS programming later in the year. But this is a very sort of anthropological quote, right, out of a book. But it's presented in a way that it's accessible, right? That somebody could read this and understand what an ethnographer goes through and how we get our information, which was the purpose behind, this Ethnography Matters campaign. So it can be entertaining and informative at the same time, and lean into the anthropology, don't apologize for it. So I think oftentimes we get so stuck that our anthropology is not doing what we want it to do, that we make it something else, right? We try to be more like the economist or more like the sociologist, or we try to use terminology that is borrowed from maybe a discipline that's more accessible, or traditionally has been more accessible or more in the public eye. And what we would say is don't do that, right? Anthropology is special. It's unique. And the way we do our field work, as you see in this quote, is critical to understanding what anthropology is, and it's critical to how valuable our work is. So we're saying lean into it and don't apologize for it.
Can I just add also, with that particular content, we produced these intersectional anthro quotes. And one of the nice things about these is that you can put something that's maybe a little bit more anthropology-y, for lack of a better word, kind of academic-y, right? But then they also always go up with a caption. So you have the ability to kind of unpack that for the person who's going to stumble across it. So there are two different places where someone is going to be able to get this point. I just want to add that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? So it works in two ways. You can make it richer, for sure. And then we think about what it means to do rigorous social media, right? What it means is it an oxymoron, right? But so we think about 2 questions to ask yourself if you're doing a tweet. Does it make you sound like a reputable scholar, right? You are a reputable scholar. Does it make you sound like a reputable scholar? Does it push the needle for anthropology? Right? Is it showing how anthropology can enter those conversations? Is it entering those conversations as an anthropologist in a way that that honors the rich research behind it? And then we talked a little bit about this, about how we need each other, right? We hear this a lot in these days. We are in this together, but we really are in this together as anthropologists. And you want to identify influencers and make them allies. So you heard from Carrie Hawk-Lessard earlier, who partnered with Greg Deal. That's the image I was talking about. We've partnered with them. He has a big Instagram following. That's one of his pieces of art there that you see we've been since 2015 working with them around this Change the Name campaign that you may know that has come to fruition. And Carrie's point was that anthropology can be used to move the needle if we can connect with each other and support each other's work in this way. Anya is a feature film that was made by an anthropologist that explores anthropological concepts in a love story. We can't all make feature films, but we can certainly, Carolina Taylor and Jacob, who are the filmmakers. Carolina and I is an anthropologist, and we went to grad school together, and we've stayed connected in our pursuit of public scholarship, and so we share with each other. Also, and you see Agustin Fuentes there as well, a big collaborator. So making allies with people who are already in spaces that you want to be, or people who are doing kind of comparable or complementary work, and sharing, having them share your work, you're sharing them work, and they're lifting you up. And similar to the comment I made with Destiny, we have to, if you are in a senior position and you have an opportunity to write a tenure letter, or something that is, if we're in academic spaces and this work is going to be seen for the value that it provides, those are people that can do that for you, right? And at this moment, those people can be us, right? If you're thinking about how to take this to the next level, we are in this with you as Cool Anthropology, right? We can share your work, we can collaborate. So I think that it's very, very important to identify, and this language of influencers and products and things like that. You may not like that language from our anthropological perspective, right? But allies and friends and co-researchers, and those are all things that I think that we can get on board with. All right, so we're not quite finished, but we wanted to give a little thank you here and see some tweets from some of our allies. When you do a presentation and you have allies, that they share your information for you. So we do really want to thank the New York Academy of Sciences, the Anthropology Division, the Wenner-Gren Foundation, all of those collaborators, the ones you saw and the ones you haven't seen. We have a lot of amazing cool anthropologists that collaborate with us and support our work, and we hope we support theirs, and the WW Foundation as well, and the newly named. So we have a little time for questions and answers. We will look in the Q&A and see if we can address some of those more directly. So our question for you is, how can you find your collaborators? And those might be some of the places that you can look for them. But we would also like to open up the floor for a broader conversation around anything that you've heard. There was a lot of information given. Hopefully everybody has their plan and they're ready to go implement it. But if that's not exactly where you are, that's fine. But hopefully you've found some information that might be useful to you, if only an ally in cool anthropology. So let's see. Let's look in the chat here. All right. So Jim says in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry, there's a conversation in the chat, and then there's also a Q&A. So we're looking in the more formal Q&A. If you have something going on in the chat that you'd like to bring over, or you can draw our attention to, we're going to try to make this as interactive as we can do. Is part of the problem, the challenge for anthropologists to respond to the memification of public discourse with the conversation stopper, it's more complicated than that. So that's a great question, right? We're very good at critiquing, right? At pulling apart and being and critiquing, but where does that take us in that kind of, in public discourse?
Yeah, I'd say it's like, it doesn't have to be one thing, and meeting people where they are is an important part of getting information to them. And I'd really love to know what Baird and Hania think about this, because they really do this work day in, day out for Cool Anthropology. So how do you grapple with that?
I mean, I think that it's more complicated than that is a totally acceptable answer, provided it's not like the end of your answer, right? I think we have to be willing, as Victoria said, to meet people where they are. Let's see if she's still here. A very good friend of mine from my program, who's on this very chat right now, Svetlana, said to me once, it's completely unsocial scientific to speak about things in black and white, right? That we should always be skeptical of these sort of really polarized takes on things. And I think that is a message that goes beyond anthropology. But I think one of the things that anthropology can do is remind people that the world is actually very complicated, and that we are not going to solve the many problems of the world with little sound bites and little hot takes, right? But that those little sound bites and hot takes can inspire a conversation that then might get us to a deeper engagement.
Yeah, certainly the genesis of Cool Anthropology was, how can we change the world, right? And that we narrowed that down to, how can we get inside people's conversations? Like, how do we get to dinner tables? How do we get to water coolers? So we've thought quite a lot about interactivity and that sort of, and the embodiment of engagement. Maybe you can speak more to that, Christina.
Yeah, certainly. I think that Baird made a really good point, right? That it's okay to say it's more complicated than that. That's one of anthropology's strengths, right? Is to understand depth and nuance and from our very beginnings, what a wink means. But if you can understand that complication is not something that has to end, right? And that if you can experience that complication from the inside, right? So we have this tool where we kind of understand through doing, right? We understand deeply from the inside. If we can kind of replicate that, I don't know that that's going to happen in the social media space necessarily, but we at Cool Anthropology, we've tried to replicate that through sort of live installations that have translated into the space. And there are ways, to kind of make people feel a certain way in the social media space. And then that feeling can translate into knowing, right? And I think that, like I said about leaning into anthropology, I truly believe that we should lean into that, right? That we shouldn't shy away from that. Like, okay, no, that's not what the world understands necessarily as data. So we do have those rich understandings. And I think that's what Victoria was talking about when she's talking about the embodiment of these ideas. And then you can move the needle forward and change the conversation and, share some of the data that, you have collected, if we want to use that word.
I also, sorry, just to add, I also think and this goes for the social media space and also the meat space, right? It is very, very hard for someone to when faced with a challenging viewpoint, say like, oh, actually, I was wrong all this time and you are right, right? That rarely happens in classrooms. It rarely happens on social media, but we do know that it happens, right? And so it's also really important to not be discouraged by like, oh, I made this meme and it didn't like immediately change the world, right? Like, or I didn't see it immediately change the world, because whether that person probably the more they argue with you, right? The more they're gonna go home and think about what you were arguing about, right? And I think it's really important for us as educators and also as public scholars to remember that the impact of our scholarship is very rarely immediately visible. And we have to be okay with that.
Yeah,
That's a great point.
That is a really great point. And I'm glad Carrie shared earlier about the impact that was, many years in the making, right? Many years in the making, but it had an impact.
Well, it's still happening too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teams.
We'll continue to look in the Q&A. If somebody would like to share a comment and answer to the question on your screen, or a question that you asked in the Q&A and you'd prefer to ask it verbally,
or to enter the conversation.
Or enter the conversation with your voice, please raise your hand and we will make speaking available for you. It sounds so, we will allow you to speak. You are allowed to speak. All right, until I see a hand, I'm gonna move on to Nina's question. Can we think of public scholarship without talking about the individual selves, or taking up the language of the brand, product, media star, influencer? Why accept this neoliberal language? And this is a really great question, actually. And we did use the word product. And Hania, who works with us, is a media marketing major, and so she's marketing products. And that was part of our initial conversation, was like around like what we're actually trying to do here, right? Are we just trying to get the most likes possible? How are we trying to do that? So I think that's thank you, Nina, for bringing that up. I think that we're using that language because we're talking about this world, right? We're entering the world of social media and social media marketing. And if we're going to live in this world, it's we can understand the language that's used. I think that I'd like to think about ways to do it with. I think we actually do have discussions of how to do it where we're not just aiming for the same thing. Like we don't want 1 million people to. I mean, it would be great if 1 million people saw our content, but we're not going to sacrifice our content for that, right? So there's not that many people maybe that are going to enjoy our swipe to nose about what ethnography can offer the current moment. It's not, we'd be happy for a lot of people, but I think we can enter the world without sacrificing the content.
Yeah, and when we entered into this space, and especially when we started forming a team to govern this space, it was hard to translate what we wanted in terms of infiltrating conversation into what can actually happen in these spaces. So actually we're starting to work with Hania and to get to know this world and this language was imperative for us to be able to collaborate with her. So thinking about your presence as like yourself as an influencer and yourself as the product maybe might mitigate all of the deluge of like the chaos of all the information and all the different things that are happening simultaneously in those spaces.
I think it's also really important to mention that a lot of what we do anyway at Cool Anthropology, and that I think we should all be doing as public scholars, is we don't just produce content, right? A good portion of our content is signal boosting other people's content, right? So you saw all of these, we still don't have like a great name for them, but the quote memes from our various intersectional anthropologists, right? That's our interpretation of that quote, but we work in direct conversation with those anthropologists to help us guide that content and to make sure that it's something that they also stand behind. And so I think one of the ways to avoid that kind of, right, like to a certain extent, this is a neoliberal space, like Twitter and Facebook are two of the largest companies in the history of time, right? Some of that is unavoidable, but I think thinking critically about whether I am always just promoting myself and my content, or whether I'm going out of my way to signal boost other content that I also find important, and to actually collaborate with people meaningfully, can allow you to do some kind of less market-driven things within what is undeniably a kind of neoliberal frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that addresses Nina's question, her follow-up question too, about how it's not just individual anthropologists making individual pieces of content. You know, it's not just this individualized experience. Like, you know, we're very collaborative. We work with different folks and boosting their content, and we kind of create these things together. I don't know if Hania wants to talk about how it's been like to work with anthropologists instead of working with a product. Like, if you employ all your same techniques as you would if it was a product that you were selling, you know, or a product that you were, or if, you know, if it has been a unique experience. And do you have any thoughts that maybe you want to share on that?
Yeah, so it has been, I don't want to say harder, but it's definitely been, I've had to look at it differently. Instead of trying to make it as energetic and happy and bubbly, it's, when we're talking about more serious topics, I can't just do whatever I want with it. We have to be like a bit more careful with like certain hashtags we use, certain people we use in certain pictures, like if certain anthropologists aren't like the best to highlight during certain points, posting during certain times where it's like not appropriate to post, just being, I guess, more aware of the environment when we're posting and creating our content.
All right, thank you. So there's a couple questions that are related to sort of permissions, FERPA permissions with using social media in a classroom setting. So there's a certain kind of privacy. Students have to be able to choose their own level of engagement and privacy. So if they want a separate account that's available only to the professor, that has to be an option. So you can't, you know, force students to do that. And you never want to transmit grades. Like, you never want to put on someone's Instagram post like that was an A post or something like that. You would never want to do that. So that's how I do it, is there's a sort of an optional component. I do use, I compel my students in the same way as I was compelling you at the beginning of this workshop, that we have a civic responsibility to share the research and what we're learning with our communities. But if it violates their personal, boundaries, then I don't force that. They only have to communicate with me, and they can share with me.
And one term that I wanted to mention that wasn't part of our presentation is the public good, and contributing to the public good as a concept, as making that as part of your ethos. And I definitely understand the neoliberal terminology making one hesitant, but I think thinking about placing yourself and your knowledge into the public good so that it might influence social media managers, it might influence directors of nonprofits, it might influence K-12 students or whomever, is vital in this moment. You know, that we're in a very transformational moment, and these grounded perspectives are mostly absent.
I wanted to add also to using social media in the classroom. I teach a freshman seminar every year that is specifically about social media ethnography. And I actually think it is a great solution to the question that was asked earlier, right? Like, how do you teach ethnography when you can't breathe the air or go outside? And also it gets around, right? It is complicated to have people do real ethnographic research in the span of a semester, right? But social media spaces are culturally culturally informed spaces in the same way that any other ethnographic context is, right? And so also to the question about FERPA, you don't necessarily have to have people creating social media content in order to use social media in the classroom, right? So there are many platforms that you can engage with that you can see the content without having an account, right? So if someone wants to do an ethnographic analysis of a certain like Twitter community, but they don't actually want to be on Twitter, that is totally possible, right? And I think it's really important to talk about the fact that social media ethnography has sort of the kind of problems of social media ethnography, quote unquote, also have analog equivalents, right? We have this idea that social media presents us with like this really partial perspective on things. And of course it does, right? But also so does real life, right? We are never actually capable of getting inside our interlocutors' heads, right? There's always mediation happening between what we're hearing and what we're producing. And so I think it's more pedagogically interesting to say, okay, here are the limits of your particular ethnographic context. What can you do with this, right? And then the last thing I will say, and this entirely depends on your own comfort level with this, but I have a policy that I don't ask students to do things that I won't do myself. So I usually have them start out by doing research on me and looking to see what they can find out about me on my social media profiles. And it is illuminating.
Thank you, Baird. It seems like Michael asked a question if we had resources to help guide, and some of you may be guides and not generating content yourself, and that's wonderful. And we don't have specific resources, but resources are on our agenda, and it sounds like Baird has, we can write some of this up and provide some resources. So resources are what we're asked for most at Cool Anthropology, how-to guides. And so thank you for your question, Michael. And we have this available, the slides that you've seen during this presentation, and we hopefully will have more available to you. I'm just looking at, again, raise your hand if you would like to speak. This seems a little strange, us just talking, but in the meantime, Maria was asking about interdisciplinarity, right? So how does this relate to interdisciplinary scholarship? And it's interesting because we're a pretty interdisciplinary team, and we've really been touting anthropology very heavily. And I think that, you know, I'm a fan of anthropology, but I work at an interdisciplinary institution. We definitely feel like a lot of what we're talking about here can be used across disciplines. And in ways that can kind of highlight similarities and differences. We had a recent Swipe to Know that talked about other professions that used other places ethnography was used and how it was used. And that was people were grateful, I think, for that Swipe to Know. So
I do think that one of the things that we're looking forward to is providing annotated bibliographies so that various researchers and people who are interested in self-led learning can find reading lists of various voices throughout anthropological history to learn about different types of topics. So in our Shifting Stereotypes project, we're going through 12 terms like power, change, and we'll have annotated bibliographies associated with each of those terms. Baird, certainly with all of his work, is also keeping a great running annotated bibliography. And we're hoping that a lot of these resources will be available not just to anthropologists, but to other researchers who would like to use these materials in their own work. So I think like thinking about this public scholarship more broadly and keeping the scholarship like with a bibliography as an example is something that can really be done to help interdisciplinarily.
All right, I think that we have one more question in the chat about how to best maintain a public presence through social media when so many social media platforms have ethical problems. So I feel like, you know, you just stick to your ethics. I think there's a reason to avoid almost any kind of practice. But I think that, you know, we have an anthropological code of ethics that we follow, that our first obligation is to our research participants. And so I feel like we uphold that in the way that we post. I think putting positive content in those spaces. So I think that if you feel that Facebook doesn't do enough there's obviously many ethical problems with Facebook and their choices, but a lot of people are there and we want to reach them and we want them to read our content and not some of the other content, because if they're there reading content, it may as well be ours. So I guess that's really our approach. As long as we maintain our ethical standards in the development and the dissemination of our own content, I think hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think generally, like we really would like to meet people where they are. Like that's our personal ethos, is conversations are happening, and we would like them to be heightened with grounded research and with self-reflexivity and with cultural relativism. So I think that our goal as an organization, as a crew of people, is to find people where they are and to be a part of the conversations that are already happening.
Yeah.
I also think, sorry, I didn't cut you off. I also think as anthropologists, we can make those ethical discussions part of what we're talking about on these platforms, right? So we've been thinking a lot about quote unquote fake news recently at Cool Anthropology, right? And despite its obviously like myriad ethical problems, Facebook is also like undeniably the best place to go to talk about fake news, because that's where so much of it is happening, right? And so like think about what it would look like to have a meme that's sort of telling you how to think critically about what you're seeing on Facebook, and then immediately be able to look at the next thing on Facebook and apply it, right? So, you know, as anthropologists, we are fans of staying with the trouble, right? And I think it's important to remember that that trouble can and probably should be a part of what you are talking about on these platforms.
Absolutely.
Certainly. All right, with that, thank you to those of you who have stuck it out to the bitter end. Keep in touch with us, please. Many of you have said you're going to do that in the chat. Thank you. You know, invite us, come to New York, and find us on the web. Let's keep the conversations going.
Yeah, and if you have more questions or other insights, and you're on social media, please, let's bring the conversation over there. Let's continue it. It's a really important one, and it should be ongoing.
Thank you again to the New York Academy of Sciences Anthropology Division for inviting us to kick off this amazing programming, and bring us into this space to talk about what we're very passionate about. And thank you again to all of you that are still here and that have joined us.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to kind of jump in. This is Uzma Rizvi again, chair of the anthropology section for the New York Academy of Sciences. I wanted to thank Cool Anthro, this collective, this amazing group of individuals. So rich, I learned so much. I feel like you provided us with an excellent toolkit, curated as a thoughtful, rigorous, and multimodal way for how we might make our research make a difference. So thank you, Christina. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Baird. Thank you, Hania. And I also really wanted to kind of amplify Christina and Victoria's thanks to all of you who've commented, who answered the polls. I know I was like texting. So, you know, like we were all in there, right? So engaged in the Q&A. And I think that's really what made this workshop vibrant and really relevant. So thank you to all of you. I also wanted to take this chance to mention the Black Trowel Collective micro grants. So check them out at blacktrowelcollective.wordpress.com in case you're interested to see what mutual aid within archaeology might look like. They're grants that are given to folks who need additional money, archaeology grad students or undergrads who need to go to field school, etc. No questions asked. If you feel like you already have enough money and have some to donate, you should check them out, because I think it's both a place to collect resources as well as to distribute resources. So again, thinking about mutual aid within this space, I think is kind of significant. So anyhow, thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar presentation by the Anthropology section of the New York Academy of Sciences. Our next event is on October 19th, and it's entitled Migration Through the Camera Lens, Ethnography, Film, and the Migrant Crisis. We'll be joined by panelists Jason DeLeon, Raul Paz Pastrana, Isabel Alexandra Nathani, and it'll be moderated by Naeem Mohamed. So you have here filmmakers, anthropologists, filmmakers. So there's a lot going on here. There'll also be a film screening of Border South, the 2019 film, prior to the panel discussion. Now, just so that's clear, this panel discussion is part of the larger Hostile Terrain 94 screenings and talks that are taking place throughout the month of October across New York City and the metropolitan area. So to ensure you receive notice of the screening and the panel information after this webinar, you can sign up with us at NYAS, or you can, I think there'll be an automated email that comes to you, providing you with the opportunity to sign up to join our email list. Once again, thank you to the workshop facilitators and to all of you who have attended this from all across the globe. Be well and be safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Attendee 0.
Yeah, I just went through. I don't know how to turn this off. Like, I'm just like,
I told Baird, I'm like, keep smiling, get my Martin.